Welcome everyone, Hassan Ahmed here, immigration attorney, and today we're going to be talking about how to prepare for your naturalization interview. Now, I want to caution you, the first thing I'm going to tell you, I'll probably say this several times, the advice I'm going to give you is generally applicable no matter which office you go to, right? But you should always speak with an attorney who knows the local office that you're going to, because procedures can vary, right? And on top of that, of course, cases can vary. And so this advice that I'm about to give, like I said, generally applicable for most cases, but always make sure that you speak with an attorney, not only about your own case, but about what goes on at your local USCIS office. That being said, if you filed for naturalization and N-400, you've got to have usually 5 years as a permanent resident, not spend too much time outside the United States, have a relatively clean criminal record. You obviously want to make sure before you file that all of these things are taken care of and that you qualify for naturalization. All right. Several months after you file your case, and the exact time will vary, and there's a lot of unpredictability due to the pandemic, you're going to have a notice sent to you telling you to come in for your interview. It's usually about 2 to 3 weeks or so before the date of the interview. So you'll have time to prepare and collect any documentation and things that you need to take. Now, the day of your interview, you're going to want to get there maybe 30 minutes before. Okay, at most USCIS offices, you're not going to be allowed into the building more than 15 minutes before your interview as a security or pandemic COVID-19 protocol. Make sure you wear your mask. You have to wear a mask. And in addition, only applicants, so you filing for naturalization and your attorney, are going to be allowed into the federal building where the interview takes place, inside the USCIS office. If you have someone that needs to take you, most of the time they're going to have to wait outside in the car. Going into a federal building is usually just like getting on an airplane, so make sure you don't have any snacks or water or gum or anything sharp, nail file, lighters, things like that. Don't take that into the building with you. A lot of times they will send you back out if they don't trash it, and that means you're going to have to go through the security line again. All right, and remember, you're not going to be allowed in more than 15 minutes before the interview. And this is during the COVID-19 pandemic. Once you go through security, you're going to check in, and the procedure here varies depending on the office, and you'll make your way up to the waiting area and make sure you're checked in. And eventually you will be called in by an officer. It won't necessarily be at the exact time that they call you. Be prepared to wait 15, 20, even 30 minutes, in rare cases even longer if they happen to be backed up. Once you go behind and into the USCIS office, or the actual office, these interviews are interviews, they're not hearings. In other words, they're what we call non-adversarial hearings. There's not going to be a government attorney waiting to ask you questions or a judge. It's simply an officer behind a desk. If you went through the green card process in the United States, then you're going to be familiar with this setup. They will swear you in. So you're going to have to raise your right hand and swear that everything you say is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You will have to show your green card. Make sure you bring it. You will have to show your passports. And I always advise clients, here's a little tip, bring all the passports in your possession. Sometimes clients will come with just the most recent one, and it doesn't cover the 3 years or 5 years that the officer may want to see to verify your travel dates and whatnot. So make sure you, safest rule, bring all the passports that you have. If you have a state ID or a driver's license, you're going to want to bring that as well. Another tip, make sure that your address is updated with your state DMV or Motor Vehicle Administration. The address on your driver's license is one way that they tell where you actually live. So if you recently crossed state lines and you still have a license from a different state, or if the address doesn't show is current, then that can cause some problems. Because sometimes an office might not even have jurisdiction if they think that you live in a different state, and they'll shut down the interview and send the case to a different, you're going to have to wait. So let's make sure that your driver's license address is totally updated. If you don't have time, because these days it's hard to get an appointment with the DMV because of COVID, most places, most states will allow you to update your address online, and you can bring a printout showing that you've updated your address, even if you physically don't have a driver's license or state ID that has your current address on it. Bottom line, try to make sure your documents are easy to understand and that there's no need to explain anything. Use the time while your N-400 is pending to make sure that everything is lined up and makes sense. All right. In most cases, most offices will ask you to start with the tests. And as you all know, as you should know, there are 3 tests that you have to pass successfully in order to become a US citizen. The first is the Civics test. The second is the reading test, English reading test. And the third is the English writing test. Let's talk about each one one by one. The Civics test, as you know, is a test of US civics and history and political procedures. If you go on the USCIS website, and we'll post a link in the description, you'll see currently, at least as of this recording, 2 different versions of the test. One is the 2008 version and the other is the 2020 version. Ignore the 2020 version. It's not being given anymore. I'm not exactly sure why. It's still on the USCIS website. I guess technically people who filed at a certain period of time have the option to take the 2008 or the 2020 test. Ignore the 2020 test. You're not going to be allowed to take that anymore. It was significantly more difficult than the 2008 version. So even if you had the choice, why would you want to take the harder test? So study the questions in the 2008. They are available in several languages if it's easier for you to understand. And the thing I'll tell you, it's a universe of 100 possible questions that they could ask you. They will only ask you 10, and you only have to get 6 right. In fact, if you get the first 6 right, they won't even ask you 7, 8, 9, and 10 because you passed, right? So the other thing that I'll tell you is make sure that you memorize the answers as they're given in the Guide to Naturalization that you can find online, all right? You don't get any extra credit for explaining why a certain right or civil right or something else. You don't get any extra credit for showing off your knowledge. All right. This is not the forum for that. So memorize the answers that are given, make it easy on yourself, make sure you understand. Sometimes the questions are who your representative or senator is. That's going to vary, obviously, depending on the state that you live in. And who your governor is, that's going to change as well. So make sure that you memorize the questions and the answers that are specific for your state where you actually live. All right. The questions will be asked orally and you have to give the right answer. After that, they're going to move on to the reading test and then the writing test. At most USCIS offices now, if the technology works, you're going to have a tablet or an iPad on the desk, and they'll just put a sentence on the screen and you just have to read it, 1 sentence. That's the English reading test. And after that, they'll speak a sentence out to you, which is usually a response to the first question. They'll speak a question out to you and you have to use a stylus or your finger to write the question on write the sentence on that tablet. Spelling does count. Some officers are stricter than others on this, but the safest thing for you to do is to study the words that are the English test draws from, and that's also in the Guide to Naturalization. All right. Hopefully you pass all the tests, but if something happens, you get too nervous and you don't pass 1 or 2 or 3 of the tests, don't panic, because you will actually be given a second opportunity to take only the tests that you didn't pass. They'll call you back in for 90 days. Now, obviously that means your case cannot be approved until you pass all 3 of the tests, but at least you'll have 1 free retest given to you, another opportunity to study a little bit more if it's a little bit hard for you, and to practice. So you'll be given 2 chances to pass the test. All right. And that's only if you don't pass any of the tests during the first interview. And another thing that I'll say, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And every time I've had a client who did not pass one of the tests, it wasn't because they didn't know. It wasn't because they didn't understand the material. It was almost always because they were nervous. It's because they were scared. And it is scary. I understand. To go in front of an officer, they have the power to grant your naturalization, something that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. Maybe you have a lot more riding on it. You want to file for your parents. You need benefits or whatever other reason you want to vote. A lot of things that you're thinking about. And it's a lot of pressure, to go in front of an officer. But I would caution you, I would urge you to make sure that you trust what it is that you know, trust the studying, take whatever classes and time and preparation you can do in order to pass those tests the first time around, and don't be nervous, okay? You got this, all of you. All right, once you're done with all three of the tests, and hopefully you've passed, the next thing is a review of the application. And the review of the application is simply that. They're just going to ask you what your name, birth date, dates of marriage, dates of divorce, if applicable, your work history. They'll ask you about your travel. But the important thing to remember here, this is not a memory test, okay? They just want to verify that all the information is correct. So for example, if your phone number has changed, or if you have a new address, if you moved while the case was pending, or you have a new trip inside and outside of the United States that you took after filing the case while the N-400 was pending. This is the time to list all of that information. If you accidentally responded to a question incorrectly, you can ask the officer to make that change. Don't feel like just because you said something and wrote something on the form that is now set in stone. The whole point of the interview is to make sure that the information that goes to the supervisor, that goes for decision, is updated and accurate. That's what you want to make sure of. So they'll quickly go through the sort of biographical data on the N-400. And you'll recall on the N-400, there's about 50 or so questions that ask you all kinds of things like, have you ever been to jail or prison? Have you ever been associated with a terrorist group or the Communist Party or the Nazi Party? Or have you ever forced a child to serve in an armed battle? Have you ever traded in weapons or prostitution or all these kind of questions? They're all on the N-400, all right? Those are a bunch of yes or no questions, and most officers will refer to it as the eligibility questions, okay? Once again, you want to make sure that you understand every single one of those questions, okay? Because some officers will ask you, what does genocide mean? What is the Communist Party, right? And if you can't answer them, they might not accept your answer when you say that you've never been a communist or that you've never been involved in genocide, because they're going to say you don't understand the question, right? So if you need to, and if it's hard for you to understand, these are words that are not used every day. They're hard for officers to understand. To be honest, they're hard for lawyers to understand too. So make sure that you take the time to understand and have someone explain them to you so that you can confidently say no to all those questions, all right? If that is in fact the answer. Make sure that you answer them accurately. One of the sets of questions, for example, is, have you ever been arrested or cited, even by an immigration officer? And citations can include things like traffic tickets. Now, just because you had a traffic ticket doesn't mean that you're going to not be able to naturalize. You'll still get your citizenship. But if you don't disclose it, that could be a problem. So you want to make sure that all those questions, take them very seriously. And there's about 50 of them. Most of them will not apply to most people. But if an answer could be yes, right, then you need to be able to understand understand that question and explain why the answer is yes. All right. The other thing I'll tell you, the same advice that I gave you about not getting extra credit for explaining why, for example, something is bad, same thing applies here. These officers ask these questions dozens of times a day. They want to get it over with as much as you do, okay? So let them ask the question, say the answer, and move on. You don't need to give any sort of speech about it, about why things are bad or however much you know. This is not a chance for you, the forum in which to do that, okay? And be careful, because the last 6 questions, the answer switches to yes, because it goes to, do you support the foreign government and the Constitution of the United States? Are you willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States? And a number of other questions, which are essentially constitute the oath of loyalty, the oath of citizenship, right? So you want to make sure that you are listening carefully, so that you're not just saying no, 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 no. You don't want to answer those last questions with a no, because that will get your case denied. Once you're done with going through the eligibility questions, there might be some additional questioning based on your particular immigration history. And this is where it becomes really important for you to understand your own immigration history and whether or not there are any problems, right, that could be used against you. Remember, once you become a citizen, it's extremely rare and very difficult for your citizenship to be revoked. This is the last time USCIS, for the vast majority of people, this is the last time they're going to be able to look at your entire immigration history, okay? Because they cannot unilaterally revoke your citizenship after it's been granted. And that means that it's not just the last 5 years that they're going to look at. They might be, they're going to look at your entire immigration history. If you filed for something 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if you had a time period when you were put into removal proceedings and successfully beat deportation, if you had some trouble coming back in across the border at some point, these are all things that can be asked about at the naturalization stage. All these things will show up, and even if they don't show up immediately at the interview, after the interview is done, they're going to do another round of security checks, background checks, that in light of the answers that you gave, and to make sure that your security and background is absolutely updated, right? So you want to make sure that there's nothing in your immigration history that would be used against you at this stage. Because if there is, it could be a big problem, and it's best to get ahead of that problem if there is one, okay? At the end of the interview, you'll be given a sheet of paper which informs you about whether or not you passed the civics reading and writing tests. And so if you didn't pass, then you'll be given a time and a date. It might be by mail, it'll be sent to you later to come back to try the tests again. If you did pass, it'll say, congratulations, you passed your test. And on the bottom, there's another, or slightly below on that same page, it will let you know whether or not the officer recommends your application for approval, or it'll say simply, a decision cannot yet be made about your application. Now, a lot of people get really scared if that box is marked. And if you have a problem in your history, then yes, it could be a problem. But many times it's simply that an officer, it needs time to actually do the background check, or they might be a junior officer that requires a senior or supervisor to sign off on the N-400 before it can be recommended for approval. So there's many innocent reasons as to why that box might be checked as well. So don't fret, don't worry, just in case that box is checked. Most cases, not all, but most cases do resolve within 4 to 6 weeks after the interview. And in some cases, as happened to me earlier today, the officer will recommend your application for approval, and will actually schedule you for your oath ceremony right there at the interview. And if that happens, count yourself lucky. So the oath ceremony is the time that you actually become a US citizen. Until that moment, you are still a permanent resident. You're still a green card holder. So you need to keep your green card and follow all the rules and regulations. On the oath ceremony notice will be another form where they'll ask you additional set of questions, and they're very easy, yes or no questions that you just have to mark on the form, just in case you get arrested or travel outside the United States, or certain other things happen, any other changes to your application in between the time of the interview and the date of your oath ceremony, which might be a few days later, a few weeks later. So you want to make sure that you're going to fill out that form in black ink, but don't sign and date it, okay, until and don't complete it until the actual date of your interview. Until the actual date of the oath ceremony. All right. That's how most of the interviews go. It usually takes 30 to 45 minutes. Some cases it goes on to just under an hour, but most cases do resolve themselves this way. Sometimes if an officer needs more information, they will issue what's called a notice of continuance, right? Which is functionally the same thing as an RFE, which you might be familiar with, a request for evidence, but they call it a notice of continuance here. But usually you'll only get 30 days to respond to that notice of continuance. And it's usually something that you perhaps forgot to include in the file, or something that came up at the interview that they need to see documentation of, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you take note. If you get a notice of continuance, it might be handed to you at the interview, or it might be mailed to you afterwards. So you want to make sure that you keep those deadlines in mind. Try to get the documentation or response back to USCIS as quickly as possible. Do not wait till the last minute. And whatever you send to them, please, this is my eternal complaint for people who come to see me, please keep a copy of what you submit, and keep a copy and make sure you send it by certified mail or some sort of trackable mail, so we can verify that it actually was submitted, and keep a copy of that as well. If you can keep a copy of it, and if there's a problem down the road, it's much, much easier and cheaper for a lawyer to come in and fix the problem if he or she can see what actually was submitted. So I wish you all the best of luck, and I would urge you all to remember that once you successfully pass and take the oath and become a citizen of the United States, please don't treat your citizenship as anything less than the gift that it actually is. Use your citizenship to vote and express your voice. Use your voice for those that don't have one, and express solidarity with those who don't have the blessing, that have not received the blessing that you've received, and be a civically engaged American. And it's professionally one of the most satisfying things for me as an immigration attorney who was born in the United States, to help someone from the path from being undocumented all the way to being a citizen of the United States. It's a long and torturous path. It's not easy, and it's fraught with pitfalls and difficulties and tricks and things that can happen to you. But if you stay the course, always tell the truth, and just don't take no for an answer, you'll make it. Thanks so much.